It starts when you're staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m. Your mind begins replaying and dissecting every possible angle of a situation that's already over or hasn't even happened yet. Psychologists identify this as rumination, chewing on the past, and worry, obsessively forecasting a negative future. This chart of the brain at rest highlights the default mode network, or DMN. Think of it as your internal narrator. In a healthy state, it handles self-reflection. In an overthinker, this network becomes overactive and gets stuck in a loop. At the same time, the amygdala, your threat detection system, kicks in. It is designed to scream danger when a predator is in the bushes, but it struggles to distinguish between a physical predator and an imagined social threat, like an awkward comment at a meeting. As the DMN spins a negative scenario, the amygdala reacts as if the threat is real, flooding your system with cortisol. This creates the feedback loop seen here. More rumination leads to more cortisol, and that spike in anxiety tells your brain it must keep thinking to solve the problem. Overthinking persists as a neurological habit rather than a conscious choice. Telling an overthinker to just stop thinking is as ineffective as telling someone with a cough to stop coughing. Christian circles often cite the Apostle Paul's command in 2 Corinthians to take every thought captive. This is frequently interpreted as a mandate to simply suppress and shut off anxious thoughts through willpower. Suppression backfires because of the white bear problem. When you try to erase a thought, your brain must constantly monitor for that thought to ensure it isn't there. As this diagram shows, the act of monitoring brings the thought back to the forefront every time. God understands that suppression is a neurological impossibility. The Bible is intensely practical, meaning the solution to anxiety must work with the mechanics of the mind he designed. The military metaphor Paul uses is far more sophisticated than simple avoidance. It moves past the failure of suppression and introduces a strategy of interrogation. Paul's message to the church in Corinth outlines the rules of engagement for a spiritual war. This illustration shows how philosophies, worldviews, and arguments can function as stone strongholds within the mind. He uses the military term aikmalotizantes, which means to be captured by the spear as a prisoner of war. A valuable captive is disarmed and questioned to understand their identity and allegiances. Paul identifies the object of this capture as a nomema. This refers to a specific, structured argument or a deliberate line of reasoning rather than a random, fleeting thought. Hostile thoughts are invading enemy combatants. Taking them captive means arresting them at the gate and placing them in the interrogation chair. The interrogation begins with cognitive diffusion. Instead of identifying with the thought, "I am a failure," you create the observation space seen in this diagram. You label it, "I am having the thought that I am a failure." This separates your identity from the trespasser. This arrest mirrors the secular practice of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. Both ancient faith and modern psychology rely on the process of cross-examination. You treat the thought as a hypothesis. If your mind claims you're about to be fired, you demand objective evidence. You check for mind-reading assumptions or catastrophizing before the thought is allowed to influence your emotions. A believer's final authority rests on the obedience of Christ. As this scale demonstrates, we measure the thought against reality defined by God's character and word. When a thought brings shame over past mistakes, you cross-examine it with the reality of Romans 8:1. There is no condemnation for those in Christ. You are testing if the thought's logic aligns with what Christ has already accomplished. Capturing a thought dismantles its power. You replace the enemy's logic with the authority of truth, informing your mind rather than fighting it. Consider the landscape photographer waiting in a harsh desert. Most days, the light is flat and gray, making the landscape look ugly. But the photographer waits because he knows the rock is always there, only the light changes. The intrusive thought is that flat gray light. It is a temporary, distorted perception that washes out reality and makes your situation feel hopeless. The rock represents the truth of God's character and promises. This reality remains present and unchanging, regardless of how the current lighting makes you feel. Taking a thought captive involves distinguishing between the rock and the light. You lock your focus on the objective rock of truth, and wait for the light of Christ to reveal what has been there all along. This continuous interrogation yields a tangible biological result. By consistently exposing lies, you forge new neural pathways, eventually training your default mode network to loop on truth. Because a mind isn't a vacuum, you must fill it with a proactive strategy. Use this Philippians 4:8 checklist to filter every incoming thought. If a worry is not true, honorable, or just, it is exposed as an imposter with no right to stay. Refusing to be lied to becomes a liberating art rather than a duty of mental punishment. You are learning to recognize the voice of the shepherd and ignore the voice of the stranger. Your thoughts may be loud, but they aren't your Lord. Victory comes from stepping aside, allowing the truth of God to win the argument.